And then you get to the year 27 AD. And that is when Christ was anointed. The heavens opened up and the Spirit came down on flesh. For the first time, God inhabited a man. Now that started the final week of Daniel's prophecy. And for 3.5 years, Jesus walked the earth. They didn't receive the kingdom. But yet he went on, and on the Mount of Transfiguration, he chose us. Because Moses and Elijah appeared. Moses was the one that said, choose you today. They didn't choose. Then Elijah came and said, choose you today. They didn't choose. Then Moses and Elijah appeared on the Mount of Transfiguration. And they wanted to grab to Moses and Elijah. He said, this is my son. Hear him. Because Moses and Elijah now appeared and Jesus chose us. Before he died, he says, you have not chosen me. I have chosen you. And he became the final sacrifice. Now, what is following is history. We have to understand the history around the cross. Because Jesus was baptized 27 AD. We read it in Luke 3. In Luke 3, we pick up the 7 heads of the beast. He says, Tiberius Caesar, Pilate, Herod was a king, Philip was a tetrarch, Lysanias was a tetrarch, Annas and Caiaphas. This is what Psalm 2 says about. The rulers of the world came together to crucify the Christ. But these rulers came to the baptism and they challenged John and said, are you the prophet? Are you Elijah? Because Malachi says the great day of the Lord will come when Elijah the prophet comes. And he says, no, I'm not. I'm the voice crying in the wilderness. But yet in Matthew, Jesus said, for this wicked generation, he is Elijah. Because he says the kingdom suffered violence. And from John to now, the kingdom suffered violence and the violent took it by force. Now the kingdom has to come with death and resurrection. And Jesus was crucified in the middle of the final week of Daniel's prophecy. So when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his Son in the middle of creation week, the true light. Time was created. The true light came. The change came. He brought in reformation. It's a total different world. Before it was preparation. Now he's bringing us back to the garden and it's a growing where the river is opened, ankle deep, knee deep, thigh deep, shoulder deep. The seed is planted. It's got to grow. First the seed, the blade, the ear and the full corn. The harvest. Peter says, there will come a time of refreshing until the restoration of all things. So what the problem is we're mixing the old and the new. Now Jesus is facing a generation here that is terrible wicked. When he talks to them at the baptism, John called them, you generation of vipers. Jesus called them, you generation of vipers. Actually, before he went to die, he cursed the fig tree, meaning this system of worship, because he planted a vineyard, Isaiah 5, on a very fruitful hill. He never put a tree in there. He put a tower in there, put a wine press in there, he put the choicest wine, but they smashed it all up. And this is what Isaiah says, I'm going to break down the wall. I'm going to crush you in the wine press. It's going to be a total new people, a chosen generation. So before the cross, we have a generational battle for seed. But the seed has come. And now you have to be grafted in him. Outside of him, there's nothing for you. Now let's go on to Daniel. This 70 weeks of 7 is determined upon the people and on the city to bring forth the Christ. It will be 7 weeks and 70 weeks. And this will start at the going forth of the command of Artaxerxes at 457 BC, when he gave Israel the first chance after being so long in captivity, and they really took it. It will be 7 weeks, 62 weeks, gives you 69 weeks. And Jesus came and was baptized. And Luke 3. And the whole, it's like the stage was set. But now they didn't receive him, and he had to be crucified. Now here it goes on. 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall in troublous times. This is talking about the 69 weeks that they tried to build Jerusalem. But when they rebuilt the temple, they rebuilt the city, everything in vain, because they didn't receive the pattern. Because the law was a schoolmaster to Christ. When Christ came, he had to redeem them. The law became a curse. This is why he says he redeemed them from the curse of the law. Christ is the end of the law to all who will believe. And after 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, not for himself. Please listen to this. And the people of the prince, here's another prince. We've already talked about the prince. Let me read in verse 25. Know therefore, I understand, from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah, the prince. So Messiah is a prince. And here he talks about, and after 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, not for himself, but the people of the prince. Now there's another prince, because Armageddon is a high place where great ones came to meet strength. The Babylon was the image, the body that Satan prepared for him, because there was a battle for seed. The whole kingdoms of the world is now standing against the Christ, God. It's the whole world has come together against Christ to make war. And the head of Babylon is a lion. Jesus is a lion out of the tribe of Judah. Babylon is the kingdoms of the world is the 4 horses running. But we read in Revelation 19, Jesus is the victorious rider on the white horse. So it's a horse. It's a lion. And then, when Daniel interpreted the dream for the king, he said, you king of Babylon, you are the king of kings. And I was like, what? But go look at it. It's small letters. And we know Jesus is the King of Kings. Revelation 19. And his name is written on his side. And no one knows his name. But then he says what his name. His name is the Word. Oh my gosh. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. And the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelled amongst us. He came into this realm. And the whole world stood up against him. And here is the battle. So he's the prince, but Titus was also the prince of this situation. Because if you look at the statue, if you look at anybody, everything my hand does comes from my head. So what Babylon carried was the spirit of Antichrist, the spirit of iniquity. Because he says the mystery of iniquity was already on in the air. It's been there from the beginning. It's Antichrist. And Titus was just a prince. And here they came as a match. In Tiberius' time, Jesus was crucified. And in Vespasian's time, Jerusalem was sacked. So from Jesus to Vespasian, there was a growing where Rome wanted to have more land and more land and more land. It's the 1st century. So this is why Matthew says there's wars and rumors of wars. These people were vicious, but they were no match for Christ. Because when Jesus came from the desert after the baptism, his 3rd temptation, Satan took him to a high mountain in a twinkling of an eye, and he showed him the kingdoms of the world. And he said, if you bow, you will have them. It's like, remember Daniel 3? He made a whole statue of gold and said, I will not just be the head of gold. If you bow, you will not burn. What happened? They were thrown in the fire, but the fourth man came walking. So at that temptation, he realized, I am the fourth man. I'm not going to change the law for bread. I'm not going to hold on to the temple. I'm not going to hold on to the city. This 70 weeks are upon the people and the city. And he says, I will not bow to this system. And the rest of the dream was, there was a rock cut loose from the mountain. What mountain? Where Moses was. What was that rock? Before Moses, there was another mountain, Moriah. That was the rock that was cut loose, and it hit the statue, and it became a high mountain. And here the war is. King of kings, horses, the horse, lion. And as they came, the lion became a lamb. And he became the lamb that took away the sins of the world. And if the rulers of this world knew, they would never have crucified the Lord of glory. And in that, he became the seed which so many people are going to be born with, because he died in our stead. And when you're born again, not even death can take away your life, to a point where he says there's going to come a time where mortal will put on immortality even while we live. Well, if we don't even understand this, how are we going to take the purposes of God? This is why you need to understand what is this. So when Jesus Christ was crucified, listen, what happened there? Israel, allied with Rome, they made a covenant with Rome to kill the Christ. And it's so clear here. After 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off for himself and the people of the prince that shall come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with a flood. The people of the prince, which is Rome, they will come and they will destroy the sanctuary and the city. When did that happen? 70 AD. The end of the war of desolations are determined. I'm going to just read it again. And after 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, not for himself. And the people of the prince shall come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with a flood. And the end of the war, desolations are determined. They made a covenant with Israel. And in the middle of the week, they broke the covenant and Christ was crucified. But it went on for another 3 years. It was persecution, but it was still bearable. But then Stephen was stoned and Paul got converted and he became vicious and persecuted everybody. And then he got converted. And this whole persecution thing got out of hands. And this is where Rome turned against Judaism, turned against Israel, the people that they covenanted with in the beginning. Because the covenant was, you're going to kill the Christ for us. And they paid them to do it. They paid them to lie about the resurrection. But they broke the covenant because they just kept on killing the Jews. Stephen was stoned. It was 3.5 years after the cross. So Christ was crucified in the middle of Daniel's 7th week, the last week, the 7th week. So the timing of God is exactly. This is amazing that God has time in his hands. Ecclesiastes 3 says, there is a time and a season for every purpose. So, we are just going through time as whatever is happening is eternity. I remember when I was in Bible school, I was so scared of the rapture and the beast and the dragon. And I really thought the rapture was going to be any day. I actually prayed and asked God, please don't come. I want to get married. And Cobus has gone 7 years now. And what? God is not going to give everything that he died for and to bring creation back to glory into Satan's hands. But Annalise, what is going on in the world? Human stupidity, carnal minds, fleshly fleshly actions. This is what it is. People need to be born again. And this is why we need to preach the gospel, because the gospel is the only way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is the truth and the life. He didn't come to bring it. You can't have the truth any other way but through Christ. I don't care what you believe. The Bible says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And this is the way that we can come into peace, only when we really make peace with God. There's many people that seek it many ways. Broad is the way. Broad is the way. But narrow is those that find it, because it's single. He says you cannot even err on it. It's a golden highway, but it's a narrow way. It's only one way, Jesus' way. I remember when we got saved, it was like one way, Jesus, one way. Now we need to go further with this, because he says, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and the midst of the week shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. That is when the daily sacrifice now ended. Remember, and Daniel 8 says, it was all to do with the daily sacrifice. Now again, the daily sacrifice is going to end totally. And the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured on the desolate. There are so many big words here, but it goes on meaning the end will just be total destruction. Now, if you look at what happened at the cross, the final week of Daniel's prophecy, then it went into havoc. Rome just persecuted the Jews. And then comes the end, 70 AD. But it didn't just happen again. 66 AD, the revolt started under Florus. He really messed up the whole governing system there. And they started again revolting. And here we get the Zachary and the zealot fighters. And for 3.5 years, they battled this out. And 70 AD, Jerusalem was taken. The people that fled Jerusalem was spared this. And 3.5 years later, the people that were stuck on Masada, Rome got them. And there was a 7-week period right at the end too.